Hey, everybody, and welcome to the System2 podcast. Today, I'm chatting with Noah Dennis, who is the CEO of Neon Redwood. Neon is a data and technology company, and but before we talk about that, why don't we hear more about you, Noah? What's your story?
Well, thanks for having me on today. Well, I have sort of a diverse background. Our team has a diverse background, and I came, I'm talking to you today from San Francisco. I sort of share my time between here and Southern California. We came together at Neon Redwood when we were all working together at a large sort of VC, PE, and public fund, and we had really come from diverse backgrounds. I came from sort of a management consulting modeling background, where my focus was really on, I was an investment analyst and and really diving into the companies and living in VBA and Excel and all of those technologies that I think someone spent a lot of their time in at some point in their career. As available technology sort of grew over the last, let's say, 15 years, our team evolved and we became really a full-fledged data science, data engineering, software engineering team, because that was how we had to tackle uh, larger problem sets. It started to fall outside of analyst work and into truly, petabyte scale big data problems. And a couple of years back, we realized, hey, some of our counterparts at our peers that we invest with side by side, our portfolio companies, and really just sort of other players in the space, um, had reached out to us a lot of times and said, "Hey, how'd you solve that question? How'd you accomplish that? Or where did you get that information? How do you have a model that can process that? Or hey, how do you manage that many portfolio companies?" Something along those lines. And we realized, all right, there might be an opportunity for us to work with more folks, and thus Neon Redwood was born. And so we kind of have a team that covers, really full stack engineering, cybersecurity, data science. We have a team of, classic software engineers, PhDs, much like your team, analysts, people who, CPAs. And so we're able to sort of talk to all different sides of the business and have a really deep understanding of sort of the different stakeholders' goals, but then also really the foot faults that will hold up getting to the stakeholders' goals. Hey, here's where IT is going to get hung up. Here's where whoever's going to get hung up, and we're allowed to kind of bring them the one cohesive outcome.
Take me back to earlier than this. Like as a kid, did you know you wanted to get into? I'm assuming data was not even a thing, right? But like computers, like what was your dream when you were a kid?
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, I guess I started too soon. Well, I think I was a tinkerer would be the answer. I don't think that I fit really well inside the box of all types of stuff. And so where my interests, you know, sort of lie outside of, when you're a kid playing sports and going to recess and hanging out with your friends outside and along those lines, I really loved building things. And the version of building things you get when you're a kid is sort of model airplanes. All right, you can build models of something, and understanding scale and understanding estimation. That was always really interesting to me. I think the thing that was also really interesting to me was, you have a lot of opportunities to walk around in the world and say, hey, how does that work? One of the ones, I'm sure you've had this experience. Do you have kid?
I do, yeah. I have a 4-year-old daughter and an 8-month-old son.
Okay. So I'm sure they'll be there. I don't have kids, but I hope mine would be this way one day. But, I'm walking around with my dad and, hey, how does that business make money? That was like really how my brain worked. Hey, that guy, one of the earliest ones was the people working at the circus. Did they go to college? Like, is this a college job? How do you get paid to do this? Like, that's like a question that I literally asked. And so I was always very curious about how things worked. And, I think part of that is my dad is a forensic accountant. He's a CPA, and if I don't know if you have any CPAs in your family, but they will tell you what you're going to trip over. that's sort of, and so he dealt with, he was in the Department of Justice, and he dealt with all types of bankruptcy matters and, really forensic accounting things. And so I always sort of had a wonder of, I don't see any customers there. How does that work? Or I see a lot of customers there, but does that mean that's good? Or how does this work? And so that kind of evolved over time. My exposure to how does this work in the computer sense would basically be, hey, his office, he did all, my dad did all types of accounting jobs, and he was in the Department of Justice for a long part of his career. But, you know, all right, right now, if we're getting rid of a ton of laptops, we're doing e-waste. Back then it might be, hey, I'm bringing home all of these old broken computers, and I'm sitting there. This is, pre Napster, pre all of these things, and I'm basically chaining them together in our garage on dial-up internet, creating like my own parallel computing cluster. That way I could, you know, test out bigger computing ideas I had. Granted, all of these things are so minuscule given how low power it was, but that was sort of like my introduction to like what parallel computing could be. And it kind of grew from there of like, hey, I think uh if if you think about doing things at scale early on when you approach a problem, it sort of helps you think about what might be the hangups. And so that was sort of a really early introduction for me. And then, the other side of it was I got a really early introduction to consumer behavior and, the experience of an end user. I did that because I worked at the Genius Bar in high school and college. And so this is a long time ago. So if you recall back then, there was no iCloud. There was no, you could pay for Mac.com, but unless you backed up your computer, or you backed up whatever you had, if you were coming to talk to us, you might have nothing if you hadn't backed it up. And so I got to sort of have an understanding of, all right, this is how a user adopts technology. Sometimes a user adopts technology when their hand is forced. And maybe you learn the hard way. Maybe you lose all your stuff one way. I think that lesson has stuck with me for my whole career because a lot of times our clients approach us when they have learned the hard way, basically, and we're both in a reclamation project and in a forward looking, hey, what are we going to do forever type of moment.
Let's go back to the stories about your dad as a forensic accountant, and you are curious about all these businesses. Is it as a forensic accountant, you're sort of trained to see, like to your point, like the faults in all these businesses. So what were his answers? Like, oh, this circus, let me tell you how they're actually laundering money to be successful. Or was he more like optimistic? It's like, no, like, yeah, you can go into circus business here, so you can start that.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I think to be a really good auditor, and effectively then down the line, like forensic accountant and so on, you only have sobriety as an answer. And so, yeah, his version of unpacking that would be exactly, I'm going to get into exactly how they're laundering the money here. Hey, I'm going to get it here. Let me give you like a really material example. From as early as I can remember, like I couldn't wait to have a car. Even though it was years away, I was already figuring out all the ways I could get one. I grew up right next to Mexico, so there's a lot more ways to acquire a car because there's a lot more cars you can get cheaper, so on and so on. So early on, I'm like, hey, Dad, there's these car lots all over the place that look like that's a really nice car. It's only a couple years old. What does your job as your credit mean? Where'd they get these cars? How did they have the money to buy it and have it sit there? How did they have the understanding of how it should be priced? How, so on and so on. Chains of used car dealerships in general and car dealerships, uh, are ripe for crime. And so, he unpacked that for me. Okay, we'll do a little side quest here. How does that actually work? Well, they work on the concept of flooring paper. Okay. They go get these cars at auction. Well, they don't want to use their own money to do that either. So they're basically taking hard money loans they're using their flooring paper to get inventory, and then they have to turn around and the whole business is just, can I capture a spread? I'm paying, whatever, 10% hard money on this. Can I sell it to someone for 27% interest? And so it's, kind of like some of those basic, openings. I want to be the consumer. I want to get the car. How do I get the car? Would sort of was that teaching moment of, all right, well, let me teach you about what that spread is. Here's how that person's going to profit in selling this to you. By the way, you don't want to buy that car at all, but here's how the whole machine works. And so, yeah, my dad is great at explaining a detailed, serious topic with a bit of a laugh. And, maybe it's easier if you get to be the forensic accountant and you're not the person who's being caught in the accounting fraud. But yeah, he did all types of stuff along those lines. And, it was all sort of, he was in DC and Guam and South Carolina, but a lot of it was like right in our area that I grew up in Southern California. And so I would get to see exactly how it went down. And a lot of times he would sort of have very material examples for me of like, hey, this is how fraud works. What's interesting about having your dad as a kid explain fraud to you a bunch of times is the first part of the story is, here's how the business could have worked really well. Here's where it went off the rails, and then here's all the illicit things they did to try to save it. But the story starts with, here's how the business could have worked. So you get to sort of hear that. You get a lot of reps of if here's how it could have worked. And, on the other side of the coin, my mom is an attorney, and she got to tell me a lot of stories of, no, this client was misunderstood. They were trying to do the right thing and they just got off the rails. So you got to hear a lot of sides of it. And, I think I might have always just had an analyst mind. I think there's people that are, whether you become an engineer or not, you might you might be engineering inclined, whether you become an analyst or not, you be analyst inclined. I think that's just sort of how my brain worked.
Yeah, how did that translate to your point in you being an analyst and then analyzing these investments and yeah, the lessons you learned from both your parents on it?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I'll tell you, let me start, like, I'll start early again in the story, and hopefully some of this is useful. But, there's basically a story that my mom would tell if she was in the room right now, where she gets a call from my elementary school and they said, hey, we're a little worried about this business that it seems like Noah's running out of his fourth grade classroom. He's like, okay, go ahead, let me hear about it. And so basically, like, look, they have little reward systems for kids, right? In elementary schools. Hey, you did a good job. You get a ticket. You get a couple of tickets, and you get to put your tickets in the raffle at the end of the week. And if you win, if your ticket gets called, you get to go to the prize box and get your prize. Um, so I really quickly, I was super disinterested in the prizes, and what I was more interested in was tickets translate to a monetary value. And if I'm holding tickets over a short duration, is there a spread to capture by other people that recognize there's a monetary value in these tickets? And so I basically sort of set up like effectively like a derivative trading spread on these reward tickets. And, like any derivative trade that goes belly up, basically the teachers were a little concerned that the kids were going to end up owing me money in this. They're like, hey, like, we can't really have a fourth grader brokerage house loan shark thing happening on our watch. So you kind of got to stop doing that. But
Wait,
once
so
I
what was the business? Is like you were charging these kids to like you had extra tickets and you're selling them out to them?
well, basically I commoditized the tickets. The goal was for the teachers was for there to be a finite amount of tickets, like there'd be a finite amount of wheat or something in this year's, wheat commodities trading, right? There's this amount of wheat futures. And I said, okay, great. I own all the wheat futures. In this case, I own all the ticket futures. And by the way, there's a really interesting book about the evolution of commodities markets called The World for Sale. And this actually happened before there was efficient commodity markets. Someone showed up basically from Eastern Europe, went around to all the mercantile exchanges, bought all the wheat futures. There was no intercommunication. And by the time everyone realized they owed this amount of wheat futures. He had, 10x what the market could actually put out and got to set the price. So that's a little side note, but so that's effectively what I did. There was a finite amount of tickets because the teachers would give out 10 of them this week or however many this week. And then they would call out some winners. And so 5 of them would come out of circulation and so on and so on. And so I just started going amassing all of them. Hey, I'll just give you 10 cents for it. Would you like a dime right now? Instead of, what if you don't win? Then you don't have no dime. And so I'll just start amassing all the tickets. And then I was like, well, there's one kid that has a ticket other than me. And so I could approach him and say, hey, do you want to win this week? Do you want to be the winner of the raffle this week? I have the rest of the tickets. Would you like to cut a deal on how we could share the winnings? You could be the winner. I could be the only winner. You could be the only winner. You could take a loan from me and get more tickets. You're going to owe me more in the future. Here's the price I'm assigning to them right now while I control this pool of tickets. And it's basically exactly how, a derivative market works right now, or a commodities market works right now. It was just smaller. I didn't understand what I was doing at all. It was all about winning a bouncy ball or a toy shark or something really, innate. But that was basically how I started to see like what an inefficiency in a market could create an opportunity. Um, that
So
one got,
did
yeah.
the school shut your business down, or did your mom come to your rescue to defend you against their illegal shutdown of your business?
Yeah, I know my parents, to their credit, loved it, and it's a story that gets told from time to time by one of them or the other. But yeah, I was regulated out of existence by big elementary school, if you will.
You gotta get rid of that education department, and all these businesses can now thrive.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, like my best friend from second grade was kind of just loved all these schemes the same way I did. And he's still my best friend today. And he has his own like middle market PE shop and is a bit of a raider himself. And it is funny the traits you show as a kid and what they show up as later in your life for sure.
So yeah, talk to me about that. How has that showed up later in life? At what point did you decide to leave your day job and start your own company? How was that transition?
It's a really good question. Let me break it into two things. How does it show up later in life? And then how did I decide to kind of take the jump here? And by the way, I'd love to know how you decided to take the jump too, because it's it is a scary thing to walk away from what you know. So how does it show up later in life? I think I would categorize it as an eye for dislocation. And when you're sort of walking around and you're looking at, I walk around and I ask myself the same question that I did today that I did back then. Like, how does that business work? I'm asking it about different things. I might be asking about publicly traded companies. I might be asking about a company that I might work with. I might be asking about a potential client. I might be doing it on behalf of a client. I might have been doing it in a past life as an analyst. But the question of how does something work applies all types of ways. And I think if what stuck with me is I really like to find the esoteric ways to solve a problem. And I think like the or to come up with an idea or whatever it might be. And I think the moment we're in right now where we have like unprecedented access to new data sources and ideas and so on, like specifically touching on the data part, there's way more interesting ways to solve a problem daily. Every time I start to think about what data set a business might be generating, I'm like, what could you do with that? Because we're kind of finally in that moment where things are accessible or people are interested in things being accessible. So that's sort of what stuck with me for a long time there. And then how did I fast forwarding to the second part of the question? How did I decide to take the jump? It wasn't easy. Our co-founder Phil is one of my closest friends, and we had worked together for a long time. So you have a lot of confidence when you've worked with your counterpart for a long time. And when I say we worked together for a long time, we sat back to back, like literally like that in the bullpen at this fund for a lot of years. So it's a lot of long hours, and we genuinely enjoyed every moment of it, candidly. And I really, the leadership we had there, like set the tone in a really positive way of like, hey, this is what it means to be really detailed. This is what it means to turn over every stone. This is what it means to do things the best way. Whatever it is that you're doing, you, this is what giving your best looks like. And I think we got to work with a lot of folks that exemplified that and continue to exemplify that. And because we set that tone, the outside world sort of got to see that as well. Like, hey, this is a group that doesn't do anything halfway. They, when they come to, you know, do due diligence on us, when they come to help us with our stuff, when they come to, whatever it might be, they do it their best. If they take us out to dinner, they do it their best. If they hold an event, they do it their best. If if they mail us a hat, they do it their best. Whatever it might be. And so as the years passed, we started to think about, hey, I think there's a lot of folks that appreciate that attitude, and we have really genuine relationships with them, and there might be an opportunity for us to work together. And so that was really like sort of what was sort of forged in the crucible of thought when we were thinking about, what could we do? And then when we looked at what we saw evolving as needs in the marketplace and where we really excelled, we thought, okay, maybe this is something we should take more seriously. And so we had that train of thought for probably 3 or 4 years before we did anything. And when I say that we don't do anything halfway, uh, we any sort of corp dev team would. We basically did that to ourselves. We beat it up. Like, how would this business work? How could you accomplish this? How could you make it replicable? How could you keep that that addict? And so after a couple of years of sort of like really pulling the thread on that, we were fortunate enough to be able to sort of take the leap.
What does it mean to give it your best when you're planning a dinner or doing the work? How do you give me some examples of how you guys don't do stuff just half-assed?
Yeah, it's a great question. Let me start like really small material and then I'll roll it out to, hey, what does it mean for dinner? I think look, it's human nature. Only one of us is on this side of our eyes, right? Like, and everyone else is on the other side. And so it's really hard for us to put ourselves in other people's shoes. It's really hard for us to put ourselves in end user shoes, in our clients' shoes, in our coworkers, in our family, our friends, and sort of on us as the driver over on this side of our eyes to provide the recipient of whatever it is enough context, enough setting, enough detail, really a complete picture. If we want to have our message received, if we want to have our software adopted, if we want to have our infrastructure, used, if we want to have if we want people to have an understanding of our understanding. And so if you were to just only say, hey, the answer is 7, you haven't solved your problem, right? You've just only given an answer. You haven't sort of allowed someone to understand how you got there. And so I think that's sort of our approach in every phase of our of our, kind of day to day. I think to do that well, to do it thoughtfully, what does it mean to do it really well if you're planning a dinner? It's so simple. You just plan a dinner. I worked with someone in the past and he was amazing at putting on these events where it'd be attended by, 100 of the most high profile people that you could imagine of today, right? These are the leaders of the venture capital industry. These are the leaders of technology. These are the leaders of this. And her understanding of their small preferences was at like a level that like, someone's parent, spouse, whatever it might not have. Like and it wasn't done passively. It was done by really being thoughtful about, okay, what's the goal of this event we're holding? What's the goal of this dinner? What's the goal of this messaging? Well, this is what point we want to get across. Well, for someone to be, comfortable and they're having a good time and everything's the way they like. And so they're not hung up on this thing that's, sort of out of place, or they're not uncomfortable in this way, so that every possible distraction can be off the table, and and everyone there can focus on the one message, and that translates to everyone can focus on the one dashboard or the one number. But let's just use this idea of the dinner. She was amazing at having everyone's dual preferences they like to sit here. There's two people that like to sit this way. They like to sit this way, which means the room's going to have to be this shape, which means the table's going to have to be this shape, which means whatever it might mean, which mean, okay, for this part of the meal, for these people to be able to more fluidly talk, it will have to mean that for the first 30 minutes, it'll be past hors d'oeuvres. Then it'll have to be or assigned seating in this way so that this person who has allergies isn't within this range of any food that could even cause an allergic reaction so that they don't have to feel uncomfortable, very distracted, whatever it might be. I'm using really material examples, but she was amazing at really pulling the thread on exactly all of these things. And so to say that she knows her audience would be an understatement, but I took a lot away from working with her. And she's a great friend. And so I think, that type of attitude of, hey, it's not just about bite of food good. It's not just about was the number right. It's not all of those pieces of, all of those outcomes are affected by perception, and perception is affected by, hey, how am I feeling in this moment? And how am I feeling in this moment is affected by, are my needs met? And, that kind of continues to spiral out, right? The most important thing's in the middle of the concentric circle, but you don't even get there, right? Unless everything else is great. And so that's something that I really try to, it's so small, it seems like, but I try to take that approach when I'm hearing someone's goals, when I'm hearing someone's corporate goals, when I'm hearing someone's personal goals, when I'm hearing a technological problem they're facing, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's really interesting because on one hand, it is very much about being detail oriented, but it is much more than that. It is detail oriented, but in the pursuit of putting yourselves in someone else's shoes and really thinking about it from their perspective and taking the time and the effort to actually try to listen to them and give them the experience, the products, whatever it is, and the way that really benefits them. I think that's takes a lot of work and it takes a lot of thought to really execute that well. How has this translated into Neon Redwood and the kind of work that you guys are doing? And I think it would be also interesting because you guys essentially, you and your co-founder, sounds like you were working together at the fund for many years, but then you started your own company. How First of all, like, why? What were you hoping to achieve differently, like, by having the freedom of having your own company that you could not achieve when you were at the fund? And then, yeah, maybe also talk about some of these, like, values that you guys have as a company and how that's evolved over the years.
yeah. Let me start with why or what were you trying to achieve? I think like a reoccurring theme in this conversation already, but it's reflective of myself and Phil, co-founder, is we both want to know how things work, right? Like that's just who we are. You don't tell me something without me later on going and Googling it and seeing how accurate it was. It doesn't happen. So I think both of us really thrived in an investment environment because you get the opportunity to be rewarded for being the best at understanding how a company works. What you don't always get to do though is go and fix those problems. Sometimes you would see a company that was so close to being the like the perfect investable asset or unlocking this new piece of revenue or accelerating their product development goals or expanding into a new product line or a new channel of growth entirely, and it wasn't our place. That was not our place to go in there and make those changes. That just was not what we were there for. We were there to show up and kick the tires, or we were there to kick the tires from afar, which is that's that's what your role is, and I enjoyed it very much. But when we looked at it, we also thought, hey, like we think there's an opportunity here for us to unlock value for the company, for its shareholders, for us. And so that's what really attracted us to it is, hey, we had sort of an interesting lens where we're able to approach a problem, understand it technically, but look at it from the lens of the CFO or, the chief product officer or the CEO, or look at it from the investor's lens or the board's lens and say, okay, hey, if we accomplish these goals, we're going to be able to introduce this new revenue stream. If we accomplish these goals, we're going to be able to reduce operating costs by this amount. If we accomplish these goals, we'll be able to allow this research team to really focus on sort of their next targets and not have to be hung up on the existing product infrastructure, product goals, whatever it might be. And so that was sort of, I think, what attracted us to it. Is it was like the best parts of every challenge that we like to take on. It was the best parts of, hey, can you make this a great investable asset? It was the best parts of, is this a technical challenge that you can solve? It was the best part of, can you unlock value? Can you decrease inefficiency? And then, that attitude of, hey, like really understanding, a person's motivations, preferences, how they feel. That makes us really good at working with each other. We're a small, lean team. There's like 12 or 14 of us. And I think, everyone here is like probably genuinely friends with each other. It's really important to us on the way in. Some of these, it's not only technical interviews, right? It's also, what do you read? What do you listen to? You know, Earlier in the conversation where I'm bringing up that commodities book I read, like, hey, that doesn't always apply to everyone on the engineering team. That's not like necessarily something that everyone's in love with, learning about how wheat futures work. However, some of the anecdotes that come out of that of like, hey, understanding how systemization could have been in place here. So it allows us to sort of like share our shared experiences. Everyone kind of comes from a different angle. So I think we take that approach with our clients. We really make an effort to understand sort of their shared experiences and how that affects their shared goals. And then we try to really thread the needle on a solution that meets that. And I'm sorry, I don't remember the second part of the question.
No, I think it was just sort of thinking about like so now we get the why you left, and in terms of the values of the company afterwards and the things that you guys are
Yeah.
now able to do that are probably, the seeds were already there from when you're working at the fund, but you now have the ability to really like build on that team, build on those core values, and create your own company culture at the end of the day. So I'm curious how you've done that.
Well, let's start off by saying that Phil and I both had really, really great leaders in our professional lives before this. The leader and founder of our old fund um, is one of the most prolific, incredibly smart, thoughtful, best people, best investors, best thinkers, most creative thinkers, diligent, tough characters that I've ever met in my life. And I definitely ask myself regularly, what would he do in this situation? And so Phil had that at a company he was a part of building as well. And both these people that I'm referring to have their own venture capital firms, and we've been fortunate enough to work with them. And so we got to take, when you have that really, really good example set for you, and you have this attitude of how did things work, how did this organization become this amazing effectively, you get to sort of say, okay, hey, these are the parts of this that are near and dear to us, and we're going to take with us. So, I think the parts of that we really, really leaned into and continue to lean into, and it's a daily thing. It's in our daily stand up. When I interview someone, it's something that I talk about. When I talk about our company, as you can tell, it's something I talk about. We really try to, first off, remember that people aren't setting out to ruin your day or, to rain on your parade or whatever it is. Like, people approach a problem with positive intent. Everyone's trying their best. Like, just because you might not come to this solution the same way or look at something identically, it doesn't mean that someone didn't approach a problem with their own problem solving set. And it's sort of important to remember that. And I think, that point I brought up earlier, hey, like the people who work here are genuinely my friends. There's a concept at Apple that they refer to as fearless feedback. And that one always stuck with me. I think it's easier to give fearless feedback if your counterparts are people that you actually know, if they are actually closer to a friend than a coworker. I'm not saying you have to look, it's not possible for everyone to be best friends, right? But it is possible for everyone to respect each other and say, hey, these are the qualities I really like about this person. So I enjoyed their presence and this is how we work together. And it's easier to give feedback. It's easier to receive feedback. It's easier to really talk transparently. It's easier to say, hey, I'm stuck, right? If you're afraid to speak up because you're stuck because you don't know how it's going to be received, well, you're never going to speak up. If you're afraid to speak up because you don't know how it's going to be received, but you've got a really good idea, well, those really good ideas are never going to see the light of day. And so, kind of really go out of our way here to set time aside for everyone to get to know each other. And what it does is it sets the tone when you get in daily stand up to feel really comfortable and say, hey, here's what I'm blocked on. At the end of the week, I think part of being in a really technical field is a lot of times, I'm sure you've had this experience in your life, the really hard challenge that you maybe were stuck on and you're deep in Stack Overflow or Google or whatever it might be. The thing that you were like really you're trying to overcome, or hey, I got to come up with a sort of novel framework to solve this problem. And look, there aren't a ton of things left that are green space, but like there is always a new and best way to do something. So a lot of those things that you face, you kind of face them alone. And it might not be what shows up in the end product, right? Like, whatever, make the rectangle show up green. Well, if the end user only sees I made the rectangle green, they don't know, really what the tough challenge was. And so for our team, we'll do something that we call code share on Fridays. Which what's the point of code share? Code share isn't daily stand up. It's not a one-to-one with your manager or something like that. What code share is about, you don't have to share, but it's just that show and tell like you would have in elementary school of this wasn't the goal of the epic. This wasn't, the main thing our stakeholders asked us to do. This was an interesting challenge that I overcame. Here's how I did it. This was an interesting thing I did. This was a little efficiency that I created. Whatever it might be, we try to set that time aside just so that people can feel comfortable to sort of talk about their small wins. Um, because, a lot of times that small win is actually like a really hard thing. Just because something was one line doesn't mean that it wasn't like two really hard days of your life. That's sort of, an ethos that really touches every part of our company. And we go through a lot to kind of uphold it.
And how it's a good time to pivot a little bit into some of the what of what you guys are doing. It would be great if you can, I don't know, just give me some examples would be great, but just even high level, how you're thinking about investing and data around these investing questions and how that space has been evolving, how these like code share Fridays are leading to better results for the end users, and yeah, it's kind of like what's the latest and greatest that you guys are seeing in the space.
Yeah. Well, let me, maybe it's worth me just like taking a step back and I'll say like, I'm sure you're having this experience also, but I think for a long time, operational data, business data, the data that's ancillary to the product, to the main goal was ancillary. It wasn't the focus at all. And I think basically the market, companies, people have a renewed interest in a more like sort of overarching data strategy. And what comes out of a more overarching data strategy is sort of a few different things. It allows an org to say, hey, if we went through this effort to get our data that's not exactly on the critical path of what we do here perfect, is there a new monetization strategy there? If we kind of go through this effort of having that data set, whether there's a new monetization strategy there or not, is there an opportunity for us to use that information to tell us more about ourselves? And what will that do to improve our business? From an investing perspective, it's really cool in that same way, right? Because you can learn a lot about like sort of what makes a company tick, and you can share with their internal shareholders what makes their company tick also. And I think so what we're seeing is finance leaders, business leaders, corp dev teams, legal teams, they're all sort of wondering, hey, are we leaving anything on the table? Is there something passively that exists in this organism of a company that could sort of unlock some new value for us? And so I think, analytics, data science, data strategy, they started off as can you identify new opportunity external to the organism, right? Is there a new investment activity out there? Is there a new addressable market? Is there a new, it's sort of, or hey, how are our users reactivating? How does our cohort churn? What does it mean if we do our ad spend like that? That was like sort of like some of the early versions of data science, right? Hey, we spent this amount of money. Well, we got this reactivation rate of our users. And when we advertise to them in this platform, we see them reactivate over here. There's a lot of that you see happen. And now I think companies are looking in addition to that, like that hasn't gone away, but I think they're also saying, "Hey, could you use that same lens and just look at ourselves and say, hey, what's left here that we're not addressing? And what's really the best way that we can make sure that we squeeze every drop out of this, that we maximize our value, that we do the best for our employees, that we do the best for our shareholders?" So that's something that we're approached with a lot, actually. Hey, we're getting ready to commercialize this product. We want to make sure that we hit all these things perfectly so that we maximize our margin. Hey, we have this ancillary outcome of data that isn't exactly related to the main thing we do here. Is there a market for it? Should it be organized in a way that'll allow us to reevaluate if there's a market for it later on? Should we have a dashboard that tells us, here's what these indicators really mean for us? And so I think, from an organizational standpoint, the goals of effectively having a fiduciary duty to your shareholders and, hey, can we squeeze every last penny out of this thing or whatever it might be? Stakes have never been higher, basically, right? Because if you don't figure it out, someone else is going to figure out, here's how you could have done it, and you're going to be left in the dust. So I think it's not exactly like an arms race, but I think there's really where someone might have once said, hey, do I really want to have a really incredibly robust BI function? Is that what's most important to me? Or do I just need some dashboards? I think people are reevaluating and they're saying, hey, I've had that dashboard for a long time. It's great that the graph goes up and to the right. I want to take a reevaluation of this whole thing. Show me the graphs that are going down to the right. I want to see the blind spots. I want to understand how we can monetize those blind spots better. I want to understand where our competitors might be eating into our share. And so that's probably been one of the more interesting things that I think we've probably seen in the past probably 2 years, like a real explosion of that. And then, obviously we've had to kind of come up with some creative ways to meet those needs. So, yeah.
Is part of what we're saying that we now have to go deeper. It's not just like the one metric, the one headline metric that everyone's been tracking, but to understand, okay, like what are some of the other metrics? What are some of if you cut the data a bunch of different ways, what are the things that aren't working or the things that could be improved? And if so, so like when you work with these companies, talk to me about like how you figure out like what matters to those industries. Like what industries do you guys focus on, if any? And when you are going into a new, like a new company, how do you actually think about helping them think through what might matter, what else you could be measuring, how else you could be looking at these businesses?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, we're really, really industry agnostic. We've worked with energy companies. We've worked with, crypto companies. We've worked with, you name it, really. But we came from a place where really focused heavily on biotech, life science, healthcare, and that's still really been a focus for us. So, what I think people are starting to have an interest in is there alternative revenue streams that could be derived from our core product? And an alternative revenue stream isn't always just, hey, we could turn around, we could sell this data to someone. That's like the most cut and dry. Hey, is there a buyer for this? That's one thing. An alternative revenue stream isn't always, let's roll out a new product. That's another one. Like, hey, we could roll out this new product. That's an interesting new revenue stream. It's not always we could acquire these new customers because they've been a blind spot for us. That's not always it either. Those three things are definitely on the table and like it'd be great. Sometimes though, it's a it's actually like a completely tangential insight. We have, especially in biotech, especially in life science healthcare, where what you find out in a market about a patient population, where you find out about payers, what you find out about providers, payers being insurance companies, providers being doctors, let's say, or health systems, what your outcomes, what a patient outcome tells you sometimes gives you an insight into unmet need. That's like really, really the core of it. And so I want to try to give you sort of a material example. So I think what we're seeing right now is there is a real need for improved patient access for the major indications that impact a population. And so what would a major indication be that impacts population? Let's say type 2 diabetes. So what you can learn about a type 2 diabetic is sometimes derived from an unrelated data set. It's not just about what was their blood sugar. Sometimes it's about everything else, because it's the everything else that is also a part of that sort of mosaic of what makes up their life. And sometimes the company that just has the blood sugar information doesn't have the rest of that picture. Sometimes the company that just has, the information about how many times they got admitted to the hospital doesn't have that whole picture. Sometimes the company that just has the information about how much money was reimbursed when they picked up their prescription doesn't have the whole picture. But when you take a more holistic look and you're able to say, which really we're in a moment where for the first time you can do it really well, because you can actually, people are organized enough to say, hey, I could sell you this information. I could sell you this information. I could provide you this. I could partner with you to do this. I have it organized finally. Or, hey, I don't have it organized, but if that's what you want, I'd love to work with you. I give. So we're able to sort of paint a more clear picture on what is happening for a patient, and then what are the blind spots for that patient. And I think what we're seeing emerge as a result of that is really like entirely new companies basically are being formed in the healthcare space to treat what's basically unmet need, or to treat really like specialized need. Hey, a giant healthcare system isn't perfectly designed to treat patients specifically that have really specific and niche and difficult to treat oncology needs. And not just treating oncology needs, but everything else that comes with their life at being an oncology patient. And if a specialty care group is able to treat the whole picture for them, then they're going to get the best care possible. It's going to be done at a way, in a way that's timely, obviously, which is super important for patient care. It needs every minute that's wasted is a minute you're never getting back. And so if you want to do it well, you got to do it quickly. It can be done in a way that's cost effective. It can be done in a way that's effective, like actually effective, because they get access to the right care at the right time. And so all of those types of industries that are kind of spawning right now, if you will, are outcomes of better data being available. There's a really great company called Health Verity, which is like an incredible healthcare data marketplace. And it's like one of my favorite places to go poke around, because what you can learn from there is pretty interesting. And really, it's actually kind of difficult to mine through that type of stuff, right? Like, how do you mine through giant patient record sets? And when I say mine through, I mean like in a prospective sense, like, hey, is it worth really, really diving in here? Is there a big enough sample size? Is there a population that needs it? Is there an unmet need? How do you get there? Well, as an analyst, right? Like, I'm not a science person. I'm not someone who's saying, hey, am I finding an unmet need from a scientific perspective? I'm saying, hey, can we work with our client base to address an unmet need in a business sense? Can we take these existing building blocks and really help them do a good job for patients? That set of data from all those different places that Health Verity has was one of my favorite one-stop shops. Now we're in an interesting moment where, okay, there's so much of it. How do you ask a question of it and know if that's the path you should go down? Well, what did, in a really, really smart move, Health Verity went and partnered with an LLM company, Metaloop, which is like specifically designed for mining through that type of information so that you can get an early read on, all right, should I go down this path? Can I get some summary statistics? How many records are there? What does it mean? Do they even have this? Over what time periods do they have it? Is it complete? So on and so on. And so I think companies are able to sort of, with us working with them, to take an early pass at, is this a place we should shine the spotlight? We can shine the spotlight a little bit cheaper because we can sort of get a sense of, will this be fruitful or not? We can get a sense of, will this be impactful for patients? And so, the evolution of those tools has really made our job easier in a sense.
Do you ever get the urge working with these companies from a data perspective to be like, fuck it, I'm just going to start my own healthcare company that does this instead of just providing the advice and the insights to them?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, absolutely. I think we're very fortunate to be, vendors to and clients of some really leading healthcare investors in the space, and so we get really an early sense of what's coming. We get an early sense of how we can be useful. We get an early sense of how we can provide technologies to accelerate. I do think that to do any of those things I talked about really well, you gotta be an expert, right? I'm not an expert in navigating CMS or any of the healthcare systems or any of that. We're good at like the thing we do. And so and that's sort of like just a concept that I believe in general is it's better to have the group of experts together do a good job of this. And so I rather over deliver on the piece that we do really well and we know like the back of our hand and get to be a participant in a great company, whether that's through our relationship working for them or with us putting in money or with our clients who are venture capital funds putting in money and us getting to make their investment more accretive by working with their portfolio companies or us working with them to identify new investments. So I think that's pretty rewarding. And I think we're sort of in a moment where we're not, there's novel ideas actually aren't abundant, but executing on them really, really, really well is extremely scarce. And so I think we all have enough humility and the VC firms we work with have enough humility and their companies have enough humility to know, hey, like this is the part of this that I'm actually really, really good at. And if we each sort of, toe the line and do our best at our piece, then we'll have the best company, we'll have the best, whatever outcome, we'll have the best investment, we'll have the best patient care if that's what it is, we'll have the best piece of technology if that's what it is. So it's sort of a little bit of you got to have a humble attitude. It sort of comes with maybe having watched the movie a few times and realizing that uh, there's always someone smarter than you. You're not an expert. And there is a moment where it makes sense to defer to the people who've been there before.
Yeah, and is it, am I hearing this correctly? Like you guys, beyond just the data analytics work, you also put in money alongside with some of your VC clients in some of these companies?
Yeah, yeah, that's right. We'll with most of our VC or PE or public clients, or whatever, we'll be investors in their vehicles. Also, we might do work for their portfolio companies. I think we try to there's only so many hours in the day. We try to take on clients, projects, people, whatever it is that are sort of aligned with our viewpoints. Not, and I'm not saying, oh, you have to agree with me on every point. And that's not it. It's more our viewpoint on being pragmatic, right? And our viewpoint on being really detailed and doing your best job and, sort of that ethos of, hey, I want to understand the person on the other side and I want them to understand me really well. Like, I think that really helps someone be a great investor. I think, if we're fortunate enough to be up close and personal with those types of characters, of course, I want the opportunity to invest alongside them. If we get it, we definitely take it.
Awesome. Well, what are you looking forward to next? What are the things that are getting you excited?
Yeah, I think, great question. Well, a couple different things. For our clients in the industry in general that we, kind of focus in, I'm sort of really excited about the attitude of is infrastructure as a service a good solution for us accelerating our goals, accelerating our timelines. If we have now, what does that do to the entire complexion of our outcome, of our return profile, whatever it might be? So That's not to say that clients are saying, I'll pay any amount of money to have it tomorrow. That's not what that means to me. It means that they're saying, hey, we're interested in specialized solutions. We're interested in full stack specialized solutions from people that really understand our problem set because we recognize that understanding a problem set means that you understand the nuance of the underlying data model, means that you understand the lens that we're looking at it through, and you're going to help us. You're really going to be an extension of us because when you go in and you implement, you'll be able to look at it in the same way that we would, but you'll be able to do it in parts of the experience that we might not understand as well. So a CFO, a finance leader, a strategic finance leader, a corp dev person, well, how that underlying data model works, that's not something that they generally would concern themselves with. However, that underlying data model being the perfect version of a data model so that they can answer that next set of questions on the fly that they haven't encountered yet, that actually does matter. That data model being the perfect data model so that when those ancillary data sets that might unlock some new insights are available can be sort of hot swapped, you know, that's important. So we've spent a lot of time sort of with that type of client to really dial in, like, okay, hey, let me understand what the next couple of years looks like for you. Like what is important? Because when we go to put this together, you know, on your behalf, but together, we want to make sure that everything's covered. And so that's been a little bit of an evolution towards that more specialized workflow. We're seeing it across industry, but definitely in healthcare and biotech of, hey, some let's have someone that's been there before do it, opposed to just generically implementing something that works across all enterprises. So that's been cool. And then what was the second part of the question? Sorry, was it what were you excited for? I missed it.
I was just like things that you're excited about in the
Oh,
future.
okay. Yeah, so I mean, from our client perspective, I'm pretty excited about that. And generally speaking, what am I excited about? I'm excited about, whatever the next revision of architecture in LLMs is, right? Like I think if you're living it, it's one thing to talk hand wavy about what AI can do. Hey, we'll have AI do it, make it great. I think we all hear a lot of that. And I think we all probably see a lot of LinkedIn posts about, I've got an AI company that completely runs itself. It hit 100,000 users, whatever it is. I think if you're up close and personal with it, if you're looking at sort of the academically studied scoring methods, Hugging Face has a great piece they did on scoring methods. So if you're really in it, you're kind of looking at it, at least in my perspective, and you're saying, all right, like I'm going to take the leap of faith and say that it's going to get there. Is the next architecture going to be, let's just have the context windows be bigger and bigger and bigger? Is that really what it's going to be? You know, that's like the equivalent of saying, I'm never going to leave Java. I'm only going to have a bigger and bigger and bigger JVM. I'll run everything in the biggest JVM possible. I'm never going to leave Java. I think, if we look back, there's a lot of examples of this in sort of technological advancement. That's not what this is going to be. Like context windows being giant isn't going to be what solves things. I think underlying architectures evolving is how we're going to see better reasoning, or, if you want to call it that, we're going to see better mathematical skills. We'll see better effectively understanding. And, I'm sort of looking ahead to that moment because that's when it'll be sort of that really transformational opportunity where it won't just be about, hey, can you summarize this document or this email or 100 emails or 100 documents or what insights are in there? Or, hey, could you look through the K-base for me? Right? Like, I think there's a lot of great technology out there doing that right now. I don't have a sense of what the next version of AI or LLM architecture will look like. I'm not that type of person, not the type of researcher. It's not my area of expertise. I'm very interested in what that next architecture will look like though, because I got a whole laundry list of, client problems that I think could be alleviated, a high probability, you know, high accuracy, high quality type of framework. So I whatever Moore's law, it's a matter of time, right? Like we're going there. And so I definitely appreciate sort of the general zeitgeist right now of AI is going to be able to accomplish it. Let's do it. I think there's a lot of it, sort of right now, there's a lot of people saying that something can happen that can't happen yet, or there's a lot of people saying something that can happen with a very small asterisk of it's going to happen with 60% accuracy or something like that. Which, hey, that's sometimes 60% accuracy, but it actually happens is better than nothing happened at all. So not knocking it, but I think when we're at a point where you can really unlock insights for a company, when I look at healthcare aside biotech, when you can unlock patient insights, when you can improve patient access, when all those types of things at a really high accuracy, at a really high speed, at lower cost, you know, um, we're going to see some very interesting new companies pop up. We're going to see some really interesting opportunities. So I'm constantly on the lookout for it. When the release notes come out for the new Claude model or whatever it might be, like I'm all over it. I'm hoping to, like I am excited for the day when I see it. I'm reading archive to see who's doing, what research. I'm constantly in touch with my friends that are still academia, whether running their own labs as PIs or postdocs, and hey, what are you seeing? How are you applying it? Um, I'm in touch with healthcare leaders asking them, hey, what are you seeing? How are you applying it? I'm in touch with, end users. Hey, what are you still spending a lot of time on yourself that really you could put some time back in your day to address bigger problems? I think we'll see some novel solutions to address those. Yeah.
I love it. It's been awesome not to hear your story from elementary school, like market maker for raffle tickets, all the way to the CEO of Neon Redwood, working on some of these biotech, latest and greatest, and all these industries are crucial to what's next, and it's also where a lot of the cool advancements are coming through. So it's been a pleasure talking to you today. Thank you so much for joining me.
I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Cool, man.